Okay, this is episode 2, the Bigfoot special, and I'm being joined by Eira Wolfniston. How are you today?
Hey. I'm well, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
and well, you know what? So basically, we talked last week about doing a show about Bigfoot, and I think I mean, Sam's here too. Hey, say hi, Sam.
Hello.
And Sam's in the background, and you're gonna somebody's watching this on the thing and it's showing up here. Okay, that's me. You gotta turn that down. Okay, as you can see, we're getting this done. We're getting it done, but somehow sometimes it's gonna, with a live show, it's gonna take a little bit of time. But last week we talked about Bigfoot and the nuts and bolts idea of Bigfoot. Now we're all on record, all three of us, as saying we think we've experienced paranormal with Bigfoot. But we're not going to talk about that today at all. We are going to explain the idea of Bigfoot from a nuts and bolts, flesh and blood type of exchange, so people have a little bit of a background for it. So, is that okay with everybody?
I promise I will not talk about anything other than flesh or blood Bigfoot.
Okay. So, yeah, because I think actually
I think there's both.
Yeah, well, so do I.
But we're not talking about that, right?
Yeah, I think spiritually it's a universal archetype. So we're going to see it in our altered states, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist in a flesh and blood like a bear or an elk.
Yeah.
There's no reason why these two things can't both exist separately from one another.
Yeah.
I thought we weren't talking about that though.
No. I think we have to get we got to get that part out of the way. Simply because of the fact that I think we can present the case for Sasquatch better than any flesh and blood person.
Wow.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be a competition.
No.
But that's making it very flesh and blood.
I am a left-handed guy, and apparently left-handed people are very, very competitive. So
our sources.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. I do have a master's degree. I have a couple of I have more than 3 degrees, but anyway. And I'm going to present this like a master's thesis, like whenever I presented my master's thesis on education. And how that went down is you basically go in and you start to present, and people just rip you a new a-hole in an academic sense, right? So they just say that's stupid. You got to defend that better. And so, it's like defending basically all your work. So I'm going to do that for today. But in order to get us into the mood a little bit, I want to play a clip. Now it's about a minute long. So, try to look interested whenever. But it's of Brian Blessed. Brian Blessed is an actor. He actually tried to mount 3 attempts to climb Everest. Is still the oldest known person that has been to magnetic north. Was a paratrooper in the army. Made 73 jumps. And so he's an outdoors guy. And people think he was in Flash Gordon, if you want to know.
Oh, that guy, yeah.
Yeah, the big guy that looks like a mountain. All right, and I'm gonna play this so that you can listen to it, because I have never met a guy who literally knows more about worldwide Sasquatch phenomenon than Brian Blessed. So this is a little bit of a piece that he was on a show that I watched and recorded.
I'd like to turn to you, Brian. What would you like to add to our collection?
Well, I'd like to add to the collection the Yeti. course, in Canada, it has the name Sasquatch, Bigfoot. In Russia, it's called the Almas giant. All over Asia, the Metomar Sukpa. I've recently come back from Mongolia, and I rode for about 20 days at one point with the Mongols, who ride wonderfully, as you know. And I said, tell me, when we were deep in Mongolia, about Yeti, Almas giant. And they said, well, the Almas, Brian, we see in the early spring, and we see them in late autumn. And we see them, several hundred of them. They have wolves with them. They're very big, hairy men, women between 8 and 9 feet high. We never interfere with them. We don't get too near to them, but they move across northern Mongolia towards Siberia, spring and autumn. So we're talking about vast areas. I have to say that when I was first on Everest, and the Sherpas all said to me, "Oh no, Brian, my father, he shot a Yeti when I was a little boy. He brought it into the village." I said, "What did it look like?" He said, "It looked like you." That's right. I think that in the early days, a lot of Westerners were shocked at the turn of the last century. Because the Tibetans can't grow beards and things like that. So you get our early explorers going in the wilderness on their own or in twos and getting long beards and then appearing in the villages dark at night with no lights. And then the flames are gone and their dogs would come out and there's a Yeti and they would shoot it. So they'd actually shot a Westerner. But let me just say this. Hold on, John. I know, love. Hold on, me, oh, lovely. There is certainly a very strong case for them. I mean, I get messages from Russians deep in Siberia. "Hello, Brian, we want you to get here quickly. We only want you, we trust you because you'll protect it. But we are only 10 meters away from an Almas giant. We're looking at it." It is very interesting that Gorbachev, when he was in power, mounted a £25 million expedition to the Almas Mountains. He went there because the people on the periphery complained that their women and children were being abducted by the Almas giants. Now, take the most flat-footed mountaineer we've ever had, Don Willems. About 20 years ago, News at 10 recorded every evening live. We're going to the British expedition approaching the south face of Annapurna. News at 10 said to him, "Well, Don, what does the face look like?" He said, "What's the bloody face look like?" He said, I don't know. I've not been looking at it. There's been a man 9 feet tall walking around my tent for days. Dome-shaped head, black face, green eyes, covered in hair, a great big giant walking around my tent. That was recorded live. It obviously does exist.
So there you go. So that's a case for flesh and blood right there. So basically, we're looking for something that is 7 to 9 feet tall, that basically can mate with women, and is and has been around the world. So what can we do to back that up? Well, I was doing some research, and you guys know me. Well, I don't know if everybody knows. I used to curate a museum, and so it was very, very difficult to do because people would always try to like sell you on hoaxes and stuff. Like this was my grandfather's. It was in the First World War. Blah blah blah. Pay me all this money for it. It's one of one. And so I try to take a look at this from the standpoint of scientists, because everybody says, "Oh, science doesn't take us seriously, and science is never going to do this. Science has never looked for anything like this," and it's just simply not true. The the whole point about it is, and I'm going to show you here something in a minute that goes to prove my point, that science has looked for strange hominids from day one. And I'm going to show you a picture of here of a guy who became very famous in the early 20s. This is in 1912 he found this. And let me see if I'm going to bring this up. So if you're looking at the screen now, you're seeing Charles Dawson, and he's got a hand, and he's got something there in his hands. He's looking at it. You've got the picture of what it looks like there. He found this in Surrey, and this was he was a amateur archaeologist. He went and took it to the British History Museum, or the Natural History Museum in Britain, which was part of the British Museum, and everybody loved it. Loved it. Everybody thought that was great. So at that point in time, uh, things happened with it where they made reconstructions of the skull. You can see there it's got nice big cranium, uh, ape looking front, so it protrude there in the front. It was so popular at that point in time that they actually provided that to every museum in Britain. So they made up a cast of it, and they provided that to every museum in Britain. Now, part of what the issue is, whenever you're looking at these kind of things, is these black parts here are what they found. So they found a little bit above the nasal cavity, a little bit of the eye socket, part of the jaw, and part of the cranium. The rest is put together by people who know.
The imagination.
No, people who know. People,
Filling in the blank.
people who know, right? Because this is it. So, and then at that point in time, then you've got pictures of what they did. So you've got this guy. He's walking around England, and he's he's a nice hairy looking guy. Here he is, like sitting on his front porch. He's whittling a stick, because this is the way it is. And then you've got him over here. Oops. There. Well, let's see. How is that? Okay, there we go. There we changed. Okay, then you've got this guy over here. He's out hunting and everything like that. Well, so for years, this was the missing link. The missing link. We found the missing link, and this was the thing that was supposed to be the difference between Neanderthal and humans. We found it. This guy coincidentally found it a mile from his house, just buried it up in his yard, and he dug it up, and there it was, and everybody in the museum thought it was great. The people came over from the Smithsonian Institute. They said it was real. Everybody said it was real. The problem is that it wasn't real at all. It was one of the biggest hoaxes ever perpetrated in science.
Well, I think the Smithsonian probably jumped on that because it was local and it kind of fed their ego.
Well, the Smithsonian, the Smithsonian was in America. So so British people thought it was real. American scientists thought it was real. Everybody thought it was real. And basically all it was a human brain that some guy had dug up from the 1400s, and he put an orangutan jaw on it, broke bits of it off, and that was it. And then everybody else put it together. So I mean, he perpetrated a hoax. He filed down the canine teeth, and everybody fell for it. Now, whenever they came out with radiocarbon dating in the 1950s, so this thing had lasted for 40 years, that everybody thought this was absolutely real. Whenever radiocarbon dating came out in the 1950s, everybody started pointing fingers at everybody else. You were in on it. You knew it was a hoax. This is a hoax. This is a hoax. You guys all hoax. Everybody's a hoaxer, right? So, I mean, you could see that now in the Bigfoot world. But this guy genuinely just... Nothing changes. But it does show...
But it does change.
Yeah, and this is another guy here. His name was Dr. Eugene Dubois, and around the same time, a little bit before actually, he went to Java, and he found a skull, and he found a thigh bone, and he brought it back, and basically came up with the idea of the Java ape man. Now, the funny thing about it is, I did some research on this today. It's still in some books that this is a real thing, and it was completely a hoax. It was an ape skull and a human thigh bone. So everybody was perpetrating. Now, see what happens is that this guy was a surgeon, the other guy was a lawyer, and so they went. They were amateur archaeologists. They went to the powers that be. They wanted to believe in it, so they jumped on board and said, "Yeehaw, let's go!" Right? And so what happens is that at this point in time, I don't care what it is that you're trying to show or do or whatever, those people are not going to look at your stuff because they don't want to look like they're idiots because they've looked like idiots twice. They've looked like idiots twice and they have no and these guys are fairly conservative, right? I mean, professors of anatomy, archaeology, all these different things are not known for being risk takers. They like their job. It's a job. They like their job. This is one of those things where if I just go ahead and don't make any waves, I'm going to get my tenure. I'm going to go ahead and have this job for the rest of my life. I don't need any drama in my life. And so there you go. So that's what the issue is. The issue is that, so in a lot of ways, we're going to have to figure this out kind of on our own because I don't think you're going to get a whole lot of background from other people. Now, so let's go ahead and take a look at this here. So we've got this is a human skeleton. That's not to scale, but you can see there's an ape next to it, right? Now, let's take a look at this, and Sam has some expertise in anatomy and everything like that, but I can tell you a couple different things from this because I've looked at apes, right? The Bigfoot's not an ape. And the reason I can say that is because the proportions of the arm aren't right, and the pelvis is too big. So, Eddie, so whenever you look at that, look at an ape from behind. So you've got this is an ape butt. So you got to look at a gorilla butt, right? What about this butt doesn't make sense? Well, the arms are too long, the legs are too short. Basically, if you're seeing an ape walking around the woods, I'm going to say that that's probably a bear you're seeing because a bear basically has the same kind of anatomy, basically short legs and everything like that. That's not what Patty looks like. So if we're assuming that Patty is real, okay, and basically you can go on different sites and you can see that for whatever reason, the morphology of the arms, legs, all that stuff, it comes up to certain ratios that human beings don't have. Um, we have to assume that it's something that we don't know what it is. Because in order to be bipedal, I mean, basically has to have butt muscles, gluteus maximus, in order to support that kind of a frame. So, Occam's razor would say, well, what's the last known thing that we have seen in life that basically is wide, big, has body structures like that, and has a mid-tarsal break? Well, this is it right here. Neanderthal man, right? So you can look at Neanderthal man and say, okay, look, the head is bigger, the neck is squatter, the rib cage is much more robust. And we've just proven through science again that the lung capacity of a Neanderthal man was much, much bigger than ours. You can see that down here, whenever you're looking at the arms, that the forearm bones actually curved in. So whenever they were straightened out, they actually looked longer than a human bone, and they had the right kind of pelvis that you could go ahead and pull that off. So let me go ahead and see this from the. Let me go ahead and show this from the front and see what I'm talking about. So, in a Neanderthal man from the front, you can see it again. Um, it's much wider, much more robust. You can see again from the joints in the arm. The arms hang down. It's the same ratio as Patty, uh, the Sasquatch. And the only problem is it's not.
Kevin,
Yeah.
how many of the researchers feel that Bigfoot is a Neanderthal type being?
Well, I
Is that fairly accepted, or
well, I don't know. I think it's coming along. I don't know. I think primarily that they think it's a relic hominid. I'm going to make the case for a couple different things why I think at least European Bigfoots that people were looking at it in some regards was either a Neanderthal man or a cross between Denisovan um, and a Neanderthal. One of the things that I wanted to go ahead and show there is whenever you put some skin on uh, Neanderthal, you can see here the first depiction of what they thought a Neanderthal man looked like. So you've got a big hairy apish looking thing that's hanging around in the in the caves and everything like that. Now, it's interesting why this is. This was drawn by an artist who was French at the turn of the century, and although he is depicted with a staff in his hand, so he had tool use, this was a very Catholic nation. And at that point in time, we hadn't really bought into the idea of evolution at all. And so, um, you know, Charles Darwin had came out with this theory, and and one of the things that was true is it was still a debate. It took 50 to 60 years before anybody actually came through and said, "Hey, this is actually the way it is." People still debate it now, and you can still enter into that argument because of the fact that there's no missing link. Um, you know, a lot of people say, well, there's no proof. Well, DNA is showing a couple different things. Now, as we actually looked at Neanderthal man, what happened? So, as it gets a little bit older, or we start to learn a little bit more about Neanderthals. We start to see that, oh boy, these guys lived together. They were around for a while. They lived in groups. What happens? They start to lose their hair, right? Now, uh, then you've got the art of Neanderthals. So you've got cave art here of Neanderthals. All of a sudden, they're creating art, they're creating jewelry, they're burying people, they're probably believe in some kind of spiritual afterlife and everything else.
are you talking about the Denisovan epoch
Now I'm
right
talking.
now?
I'm talking. No,
Like,
I'm just talking about
wait,
Neanderthals. Now, this is the
okay,
thing. They both went through this, Neanderthals and Denisovans. Now, people think, okay, well, there's a thousand Neanderthal bodies laying around. We've got it all. This is the way it is. There isn't. There's less than 50. There are less than 50 Neanderthal skeletons that are around. Um, if you look at the morphology of a Neanderthal footprint, of which there are two that they have been able to cast, um, then you can see that um, they look very, very much like a Bigfoot, except smaller. So, like maybe a size 10, size 11 shoe, something like that. But like I said, the morphology of the foot did come with a mid-tarsal break. And so, but what I wanted to say too is 10%
So,
of, go ahead.
so, so Kevin, so Neanderthals, there was a lot of talk about how spiritual they were and that they were using psychotropic plants, and that's where the cave art came in France
Yeah.
32,000 years ago. So, people, that experience Bigfoot, they're reporting, spiritual structures, and they're sort of hypothesizing about some of the areas for Bigfoot seems to be performing spiritual tasks
Yeah.
with the teepees and the rock stacks and things like that. So that's also something about Neanderthal, and it gets even more bizarre with Denisovan.
Yeah. Well, that's my point. Really, realistically, we don't know who did a lot of this art. There is art attributed to Neanderthals because they were the only ones that were found there. The handprints was one. The etchings of the glyphs in the stones in Gibraltar was another.
Wasn't there pottery and jewelry found
Yeah.
in burials? So
Yeah.
they did do art.
Yeah, there was a beautiful bracelet that the technology to make it was quite awesome.
Well, which brings
to do that. But with Denisovans were, they were brilliant. They may have been more intelligent than we are.
Yeah. Well,
they had, high tool technology and a calendrical system based on numbers and the sky.
Well, that's
they
and far more than their
they had
human counterparts at
and
the time.
music and first bird bone flutes. And I mean, I don't know much about Neanderthals, but I just read up on Denisovans, and it was fascinating.
Well,
but they diverged from Neanderthal 300,000 years ago.
Well, that's the thing. We're trying to figure that out because of the fact that if you look at the idea of hybrids, Neanderthals and Denisovans could hybridize. So
I think they both hybridized with human, the regular human, and the humans were small, and the Denisovans I don't know what. I think you said Neanderthals were very tall, but Denisovans were over 7 feet tall.
Yeah, Neanderthals actually at the time were smaller than human beings. So this is where we have to bring in the idea of Denisovans, which was the idea of that, where you could grow. Now, interestingly enough, that does bring up the idea that if Neanderthal man made it to America, and most people don't know this, but it's easy to track. The average American colonist was from Britain, and within 100 years of coming to America, they were 3 inches taller than the average Briton. So the idea of nutrition and everything like that did start to make people taller just on their own. And the sample size that we have, again, is not very big to see where they were from. But my point of showing this picture is that as we have figured out that they were smart, they start to become more human. In other words, now you got the Neanderthal man here who's got long Lorenzo Lamas hair, and he's got a beard, and he's wearing a duster, and he's about ready to go out and pick up some chicks. And he doesn't look like he's that far away from any kind of from a human, really. But the truth of the matter is that's all hubris. Nobody knows how much hair they had. There's no way of finding that out at this point in time through DNA testings and everything like that. They could have been hairy as a Bigfoot, and we don't know.
It's like the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
It's like the dinosaurs. We all thought they had reptile skin, and now we're finding out they had feathers.
Right. And I think that's a perfect example of that we don't know exactly what happened. Now, so here we have the picture of where Neanderthals lived. So you've got this, you've got Europe, you've got southern Britain, you've got all the way over to China, and everything like that. Um, which is interesting, right? Because they don't cover the fact that the parts that they didn't go farther north were covered by a glacier. And so during this mini ice age at this time, they don't know how far north they went because they would have died on an ice pack and we wouldn't have seen it and we wouldn't know. So technically, that's just, again, hypothesis. And so let's take a look here. Okay. So but where else do we see these little creatures, these hairy dudes that live around with big sticks, and where they go? So the idea of hairy dudes with big sticks in Europe didn't die out until probably the 1600s, right? So we do know from DNA.
Isn't that like isn't that like Green Man mythology too?
Yeah, that's part of the Green Man. This is part of
And
the what? Yeah, this is part of.
Pan.
Yeah, this is
The
part of
wild
the.
man, hairy
Yeah,
man.
the hairy man. Now in Europe, it's funny, right? Because you can find the wild man and the hairy man in all kinds of weird places. Uh, in Antwerp, the city of Antwerp has a wild man and a wild woman. It was all the way in Russia,
Even in
Prussia.
Egypt.
Yep, you've got it in Finland and everything like that. Now, apparently Neanderthals didn't go to Finland because Finland was covered under ice. But somehow these people are around here. So they're showing up in churches to a bunch of illiterate people. Now that's not wrong. But all I'm just saying is these were common ideas. People knew what they were, whether that was from myth or whatever. They were there. Okay, well maybe that was just a one-off. Maybe they just had that one picture. Okay. Well, no, there's another one. So this is another one in another country. You got a hairy man with a club. Now it's funny because years later we're depicting Neanderthal man as hairy men with clubs, and then you've got another one here. This one's these are all pictures that I've taken, and so there's another hairy man in a club, and this is on top of a baptismal font. Now maybe we don't know what we were talking about, but you know, but we do know that uh, when the story of the Woodwouse was still written, they were still talking about it because in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, they do mention the Woodwouse, and uh, it was interesting about that is that that was published right after uh, the what's called the Wycliffe Bible. Okay, and the Wycliffe Bible was interesting because it actually uses some of the same terms, and instead of being wild man, it makes the case that it means hairy man. And so if you look at the Irish term for Irish giant, it actually is hairy giant. But anyway, so here we go.
So momentous are his travels among the mountains, to tell just a tenth would be a tall order. Here he scraps with serpents and snarling wolves. Here he tangles with woodwolves, causing trouble in the crags.
So there you go. So that's from Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. They mentioning woodwolves living in a cave. And again, we do have DNA evidence to show that not all Europe went from a hunter-gatherer to living on a farm at the same time. Possibly thousands of years that people who lived in agrarian areas and started with agriculture. Then they went to and others were hunter gathering.
Perhaps the first transition from hunter gathering and to agriculture happened 12,500 years ago in Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah. So
that area is where close to the Denisovan focal point.
Yeah. And so my point of the matter is that you can prove through history that humans from the eastern part of Europe, from the western part of Europe, and then people who came in from the eastern part of Europe didn't mix for genetically for a ton of time. So the idea is we actually don't have any idea when Neanderthals went extinct. We don't know. I mean, they could still be walking around. It's just that we haven't found any bodies and we haven't found any bones and everything like that. Well, and if you do start looking for bones and bodies and stuff like that, you're going to think it's a human and everything like that. And 100 years ago, you'd think, okay, there's a human that's buried or whatever. I'm going to bury it, and that's it. So you wouldn't necessarily know. So let's take a look over here at some Denisovans. We've been talking about that. So you've got. So I'm showing it now. The idea of the Denisovan versus a human tooth. So the one on the my left, I hope it's your left, is a human tooth. The one on the right is a Denisovan tooth, or and so when they were first found, they were actually called the big teeth people. That was a common thing to do. So let's take a look at what they know.
You know what else?
Yeah, go ahead.
Kevin, they were also called the white-eyed people by the Kakasha people, who I have a note to myself that is 45,000 years ago, Denisovans bred with humans in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia. The Kakasha people refer to them as the Akkarak, the white-eyed people.
Right.
So they looked different.
Well,
they were giants with something different about them.
Right. And so this is the, to date here, a Denisovan skeleton, and you can see that we don't have much of it. That's the most that we have. So we don't have all the ribs. We don't have everything else. So it's pretty hard to tell what it really looked like. Again, we could put it to the Gessie test. But if we look at the Denisovan where they traveled with Neanderthals and everything like that, you can see that there is a Neanderthal Denisovan crossover, and then Denisovans went down through Southeast Asia down to Australia. Now, what's interesting about that is, to me, what about Southeast Asia is interesting, and Australia? So Australia has the Yowie, Southeast Asia has the rock gorilla. You've got the Yeren in China. You've got the woodwose in Europe. You've got Bigfoot in America, right? You don't ever hear of Bigfoot sightings in Africa, coincidentally. I've never heard of one. I went and tried to look for one.
How would they know? They would confuse them with gorillas. We have a hard enough time as it is with bear.
Well, yeah, but you're also talking about a group of people who would know that. I mean, not everybody is so detached from nature the way we are. I mean, see, this is the thing, right? And you can look at it when Brian Blessed was talking about the fact that he was.
Don't say we.
Well, okay. What he was talking about, Mongolians, right? So those are people who live in nature. They live in yurts. They take that down. They move it around. They're familiar with it. They know exactly what they're dealing with. And to say that they wouldn't know is kind of an interesting thing. Now, in order to make any of this work, they have to be able to breed with humans, right? Because if we're making the point that they can steal women and breed with humans, then they have to be as genetically similar as Denisovans or Neanderthals, or a combination of the two. And that's basically what I think is it's a combination between Denisovans and Neanderthals. Now, which would be able to breed with a human as well. So the idea, but it has to be that way, because you can't breed an ape with a human. They tried in Soviet Russia. They wanted to come up with a super soldier, and they tried to uh,
Oh,
blend a ape and a human, and it didn't work. They could not get it to work.
that's good.
Well, no, I understand. It's terrible. I mean, it's a terrible thing. And so, but it can't be done. So if you want to go ahead and take the whole ape approach, then all you have to do is just not pay attention to any Indian stories where they went and bred with their kids and anything like that. So, uh, you see what I'm saying? At a certain point in time, you're going to have to look for a relic hominid that is close to human, that can be explained where it's coming from in order to be able to do this. Now, Neanderthals could talk too, and so could Denisovans. So, so the interesting part about that and also what's interesting here, I'll show you something that a lot of people don't like to realize is, when we look at aliens, we always say, well, they got bigger brains because they're smarter than us. Well, look at this brain pan of a human being, and then look at this Neanderthal brain pan, and look at this Denisovan brain pan. Okay, by volume, they're way bigger. Okay, so we'll come up with some argument about why we're still better because of something else, but if you
Does a bigger brain give you better psychic powers?
well,
I'm serious.
I don't know.
In the frontal lobe. Yeah.
I don't know. But the interesting thing about it is these things were way bigger brains than us. But I guess, you know, as I think that if they become smarter than us, then they'll have to even have less hair than they have already. Anyway, so I'm showing you, this is the ice pack now. I'm showing this. This is the ice pack between um, the North Pole currently, right? And so if you look at that, this is where it was whenever they started first measuring the ice pack. And here we go. So right above, coincidentally, where the cave where the Denisovans were, if you walk across the North Pole, you get to Greenland and northern Canada. So do we have to rely on something that was a ice bridge from the Bering Sea or anything like that? Absolutely not. So if you were able to do that now, at that point in time, if it was an ice bridge, you would have been walking for a long, long time in on frozen ice and everything like that before you even got to the ice bridge. It's not like you showed up the Bering Strait and it was just ice. That was it. You would have been going there for forever. So you can make the argument pretty interestingly that it's not that far away from Finland. It's not that far away from the north of Russia. It's not that far away to get to. It's not that hard to get to America. Now, uh, the interesting thing about it is we tend to not want to see it that way. Um, but let's take a look at this. And now you know what this is, Alyssa. This is an Indian from a burial mound that is there.
See it.
Well, no, you can't. I sent you a picture separately, but it's an Indian from a burial mound, 7'2" tall, uh, Native
Oh,
Americans,
right.
never Native Americans.
Denisovan.
Yeah, well, that's it. We don't know. We don't
There
know.
are, well, that if that is from the Adena or Hopewell areas, the mound building areas, there is a strange connection to the Denisovan based on Cygnus, the constellation Cygnus. So if you go to Göbekli Tepe, where the Denisovan hotspot was, based on some research from Andrew Collins and his work, they were really preoccupied and hyper focused on Cygnus. Now, if you go to the mound building areas, there's also.
I think we lost Alyssa. Yeah, let's see what happened.
Yeah, I should be here.
Okay, you're there. Oh, I don't know what happened.
So I don't know if anyone heard me, but I'll say it again real quick. If that burial is in the Adena Hopewell area, there is a connection to the Denisovans because the Denisovans in Göbekli Tepe, based on research by Andrew Collins, were very hyper focused on Cygnus and the vulture or the celestial swan up in the sky. That is also the path of souls that you have here. The path of souls is also hyper focused on Cygnus. And you see that similarity, the mythology or the religion focusing on Cygnus, which is kind of notable because back in their time, that constellation also had to do with the pole star. So it was different then. So there is that connection with a 7-foot tall skeleton or multiple, more than one.
Well,
focus on that path of souls that Gregory Little writes about.
Yeah. Well,
their research is really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fascinating because we do. I mean, okay. So Patty the Bigfoot, filmed by poor old Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson, right? You know, if anybody's been called a hoaxer more than anybody else in their lives, it's those two. But scientifically, you can make the argument that it was a real thing. Okay, but when you look at it from the standpoint, whenever they went back and took a look at that and after the fact, so I think that you can make the argument that Patty was about 6.5 feet tall, that she really wasn't that huge. Go ahead.
So the other night I asked you a question. I asked you, what if you completely remove the hair from a Bigfoot? Could they pass on the street as a human being? And then when you just said that, it made me think about, if someone did a recreation of removing the hair from Patty, what would that body look like? Would it look like a woman?
Well,
that you could just put clothes on and walk down the street. If Bigfoot is human, but over a supersized human.
Well, that's what I'm. That's
if you would even notice one.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, like at a certain point in time, you've got to take a look at it as obviously she's broader than the standard female.
Actually,
I would say
she could be a massage therapist.
There are females like that in the world. They're beautiful females. I just wonder, it's just some thoughts.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think that's one of the reasons why, as anthropologists start to develop their theory of what Neanderthal is, and I always say Neanderthal, I'm sorry, because that's just what it's the Neanderthal Valley in Germany. That's how they say it. But as they become more human, quote unquote, they lose their hair. So it's an interesting thing where, again, I think from that standpoint in time, we do unfortunately associate hair with sort of animal, stupidity or something like that. Like less, like we have more dominion over them than these creatures. Obviously, if Patty is living out in the woods, they're smarter than us. They got to be smarter than us because.
So I have a wet blanket question.
Do it.
Because all of this is just all of this is magical, to me. I love it. I love it. Whether it's flesh and blood or spiritual being, to me, it's magnificent. But with all the technology we have, and this is a question that many people ask, we have drones and we have infrared and we have super listening devices and cameras on cameras on cameras. And there's like thousands of people with cameras in the forest. And the photos are always a blurry, shadowy movement. And why haven't we captured or invited one to dinner,
Right.
But why? I hear all the stories of, oh, government cover up or all of these things. I don't know what to think of that. It's just a person
I
that
think
doesn't, I'm not a professional researcher in Bigfoot, but as an audience of it, those are questions I ask.
Well, I think that's an
Like,
interesting
where
question. And
why
I
isn't it in my living room? If it's a human, it would want to be gathering with other humans.
Well, not necessarily. If you look at it like this, if you look at it from the standpoint of how the Europeans treated the woodwos, which was to go out and kill them,
Right,
burn them at the stake, burn
right.
them, and then you come here, and then now, obviously, when Europeans came to the colonies, Christopher Columbus is well known for giving everybody a bunch of diseases, and and
And
therefore,
Cortez
yeah,
and,
and
and the conquistadores, they're horrible.
right. So so even if you weren't going to say that they did it on purpose, Native Americans, being a virgin population, would have to uh, stay quarantined from whatever this thing is. Now, it's interesting that Neanderthals actually give us some of the resistance to some of the diseases that we brought over here that killed off uh, Native Americans in what I would call the second wave. Um, and so they would have learned that in order to trade with these people uh, that they call people, a lot of them call them just people that live in the woods that you need to stay away from and everything like that. Well, why wouldn't you do that with something that was a biological threat to you? And would that explain why, with gift giving and everything like that, a Bigfoot won't come out of the woods and just take the thing right out of your hand and give you what it's going to give you? Why does it have to be that you have to leave it? Then you have to come back and then it's replaced with something else. Well, could that be because the trading part of it knows that you're not supposed to interact with that because of disease?
Right.
And
so so I think with what you call zapping is probably something to do with survival, a survival mutation or something.
right.
And
But I'm going to say this too, because you're from California. Well, you were raised in California, Northern California, around that area. But let me go ahead and
I
say,
saw.
well, I we well,
I mean, I don't know if it was flesh and blood or if I was having an altered experience, but I did see one, and it looked as real as if I were looking at a bear or an elk or a dog.
yeah,
But
well, yeah,
it did something to me where I had no memory of it for 2 days
right.
at all.
Well,
I something came over me.
yeah. Well, again, this is one of those things where it's a tough thing to do. But let's just look at it from a standpoint of actual history. So, you've heard of Ishi, right? Ishi, the last Indian.
Of course, yeah.
Well, not everybody has.
Yeah.
So Ishi came out. Ishi came out of the woods of Northern California. I believe the 1920s or something like that. Now, people had thought that Ishi's tribe was extinct for 40 years, and so
Mm,
they didn't know anything about it, and so it was only a set of prospectors or I think they were utility workers who came across this last band of these Native Americans uh, by a cave and basically decided. Now, it's all done very politically correct now, but let's understand that back in those days, you didn't think. I mean, there was a $5 a head bounty on Indians back then in California. Most people don't know that. If you could,
less.
yeah, that,
Less. They were hanging. They were hanging him in Wairika and leaving packages of sugar laced with strychnine out,
yeah,
right out, outside of Wairika.
right, and
It was an absolute horror. It was
yeah.
a Holocaust.
Well, right, but the state of California at one point did literally pay you $5 a head if you, so you had to like bring in the head. But anyway, uh, anyway, these guys find this. They find this Native American group of people. Somehow, all these people get killed, and the Indians only, and all their stuff gets stolen, right? And Ishi and the last of the survivors, they go ahead and they hide out for another 6 years before Ishi turns up at the edge of town, saying that he's the last of the group, right? Starved and everything like that. Well, now this was a group of people who had been living on the edge of town in a cave, and nobody found them. And they'd had fires and everything like that. And they basically worked out how to baffle smoke in a cave so nobody would know and everything like that. So literally, these folks were living for years on the edge of a town where it was literally a bounty on their heads, and got away with it for 46 years. What was interesting about that is when Ishi went back into the woods with those things, he basically disappeared for a night, and basically came back and said the spirits are okay. This is it. I mean, now that's the story everybody tells, but I would say that Ishi knew that he wasn't the last one, and he was going out into the middle of the woods and saying, "Hey, listen, these guys are here. You guys hang out. You guys hide out for a while, and I'll distract them." And that you know, and so that's what I'm saying is that we don't know, and so it is possible. And a lot of people who don't live in the Pacific Northwest think it's not possible to go ahead and live out in the woods and everything like that for a long time. But I'm saying that it totally is. That you could make it all the way from here to British Columbia to probably Northern California without being seen.
I think there are many corridors that are accessed. Where I had my experience, it was a corridor. It was a literal wind tunnel and place where the elements just came through, and one would naturally follow that lay of the land. And no one would see them. It's all independently owned ranches.
Right. And
so there's definitely connectors.
Well, that's the thing that it's interesting that we don't take a look at the fact that if these beings are human, almost human, that would solve a lot of the problems if you really look at it, right? Because if you find a hair and you send it in, it's going to come back human. Neanderthals were 99.5% human, right? And so,
and I didn't know about that big brain pan that you showed. That to me just strikes me as something very important, because for me, from a spiritual perspective or from PSI skills, a bigger brain that just sounds like some of the little skills that Bigfoot has. Some of the profound.
Well, that's it, right? Well, apparently that explains if we go cross paranormal and apply cross skills. The reason that Greys apparently have huge heads is because they can use telepathy.
Well, also
right.
that part of the brain, they could be better at other skills. Everyone thinks, psychic ability, but it could also be the ability to see more colors, the ability to smell better, use pheromones, communicate via pheromones. There's all sorts of different ways to communicate other than the quote unquote psychic or pineal gland and things that be the more prefrontal lobe kind of area.
But I would tend to think that you're correct, both of you, in the fact that we don't know who made the paintings in France. Why aren't we doing a genome study? Actually, as a matter of fact, part of the stories that I read this week was, why are we not doing a genome study of the paintings in France in the caves? Well, maybe because we don't want to know.
Yeah. Well, I bring up pheromones
How
and
do you do
things
that?
like that. Yeah, I know. With because you can freeze somebody. You can zap someone with pheromones. You can cause them to freeze and have like a, not be able to go past a wall and things like that. And, it's not magical. It's something that's been proven. Communication, like with women syncing their cycles. I brought this up before. The cycles, women live together, their monthly cycles start to sync up. It's not something that we do consciously, but we're smelling the pheromones of the other person and syncing just instinctively. So there's a lot of different ways, invisible, seemingly magical ways that Neanderthal that they could be doing these types of things.
Everything is natural, even the PSI or paranormal skills. I think everything is a part of nature. I think it's just
and the I'm going to bring up my random mutant gene, the extra cone I have in my eye that's allows me to see more than normal people, I guess, average person. But you don't know that unless other people tell you. And same with the glowing skin. Kevin was showing me something about that where, we actually do bioluminesce at different, and maybe some people can see more. Well, I do have more Neanderthal than most people too, so I don't know. Uh, but some people could see that more than others, and also some people could admit that more than others. And people say, if the Neanderthal or Denisovans were living in caves, say, for example, a lot of reason that you would bioluminesce more or your skin would glow more or hair or whatever would be living in the dark, like things in the ocean. And they're doing more studies now of worms underground that are bioluminescing, and there's no reason for an earthworm to bioluminesce underground. I mean, they can mate with themselves, so it's not like they have to.
And that sounds like the wide-eyed people, the mythology with the Denisovans. What you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I have taken pictures. You brought up earlier about not why aren't there more pictures that aren't blurry? I have some, but I guess I kind of consider them more sacred and don't. I don't want to put them out, and I don't think it would prove anything to people, And
if there's spiritual beings, there wouldn't be clear pictures. And so if you're talking about a flesh and blood being,
or like you said, that could be both.
I think that some of the photos are the spiritual beings.
Yeah, and some people walk in two worlds. There's pictures of me where part of me is merging, turning green, and blending in with the nature around me, which that's very odd, and I don't know what would cause that. But there's things that the camera can see that people can't see too, and maybe that's why I've been able to get pictures that other people haven't, is because I can see more colors, and maybe that's how they see each other, and why they appear invisible to people, because they can change their skin color maybe a little or something.
Well,
like an octopus or other things,
Yeah. Well, it's what's interesting.
In alchemy, there's something called prima materia, and it's half spiritual and half physical. So I think that what you're saying is, it's been thought of. It's actually a belief.
Well,
it's
and we are that too.
Yeah,
we are that, but the more you're,
Perhaps the percentage differs. Perhaps there are beings that are more spiritual and less physical, and they're able to do what you just said that you do.
Yeah, and you can change your DNA too. Like with rats, they exposed them to cherries and zapped them every time they smelt a cherry or ate a cherry, and then their children were born with a fear of cherries. Mm-hmm. So if you tended to be a more spiritual group of people, your children could have that implanted in their DNA and change that for their children, and then they would develop that part more. It doesn't have to be a super magical. I'm not saying it's not, but we were supposed to keep it on a more flesh and blood kind of thing. And there is science behind how these things could happen.
Right. Well, and I think
is it possible?
Go ahead.
Is it possible that some people are more perceptive than others, or more spiritual?
I totally think that, especially with quote unquote psychic. I've been opening up to that side and developing, trying to pay attention to more of those things. And a lot of the people that I notice who are naturally gifted at paying attention to those things are labeled ADHD, which I think you're just taking in more information or paying attention to more than the average person. So you have a deficit in paying attention to the things the teacher wants you to pay attention to or other people, but you're actually, more skilled at paying attention to multiple things and maybe noticing pheromones or the way people look, their skin's glowing or things like that.
Well, gang, guess what? Time is up.
Are we over? Oh.
We went over the time, but anyway, all I'm going to say is I think for a bunch of spiritual kind of hippie guys and gals, I think we did a pretty good job. I'm going to say I think we did a pretty good job. I saw that Mr. Streufert was watching, so I'm sure I'm going to get lots of criticism, and that's okay because I asked for it. And no, it's fine. It's good because, to be honest with you, I think that we've got to look at the reasonable cases. I know he said that he looked at and he said that it wasn't a land bridge or an ice bridge between the Bering Strait. So maybe I'm not that. But
he's very intelligent. He's a very intelligent.
No, I understand.
He put it in quotes. It wasn't.
Well,
quote land bridge.
I understand. But what I'm saying is if he looks that up, and he will, it does say that's a theory. But anyway,
I did want to respond to Jeff said the zapping with infrasound that can also be done with pheromones. So look that up.
So we're gonna go.
Thank you.
We're gonna go.
Thank you. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that it was good food for thought for lots of people.
Yes.
Thank
your
you.
Your teacher side showed. Well, your professor.
I enjoyed it.
All right. Well,
thank you.
Bye for now. And obviously Sam and Alyssa need to do a show together where I'm not looking at both of you saying, what the heck?
Talk too much.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye for now. Like us on Facebook.
Bye, Alyssa.
Bye,
everyone.
Hey.